I am your dream companion, the one who helps you relax after a busy day. Before you drift off to sleep, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening to me from right now? What time is it where you are? Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable in bed, and come with me, because the night is just beginning, and this story is all yours. It was almost bedtime. The clock on the wall ticked softly, reading 9:47 p.m. when the father gently pushed open the door to his son's room. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast long, eerie shadows across the floor, stretching over scattered toys and the edge of the blanket where his 7-year-old boy lay waiting. It was a nightly ritual, one they never missed. No matter how tired he was, the father always came to say goodnight. "Hey, buddy," he said with a warm smile. "Ready to sleep?" The boy nodded, but something about him felt off. His expression was strange, a wide grin, too wide, stretched from ear to ear. It didn't look forced, exactly, just wrong, unnatural. The father hesitated, tilting his head slightly. "You okay, champ?" The boy nodded again, that same frozen smile never faltering. Then, in a small, almost playful voice, he said, "Daddy, can you check for monsters under my bed?" The father chuckled softly. "Monsters? You're getting too old for that, aren't you?" he said, kneeling down anyway. He didn't want to ruin their routine. The wooden floor creaked under his knees as he bent forward. He grabbed the edge of the blanket and lifted it slowly, letting the dim light spill beneath the bed. And then he froze. His breath caught in his throat. Under the bed, pale and trembling, was his son, the same pajamas, the same face, looking up at him with terrified eyes. The boy beneath the bed whispered, voice trembling, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." For a moment, the world went silent. The father's mind refused to make sense of what his eyes were seeing. His heart pounded so violently he could hear it echoing in his ears. Slowly, his gaze drifted upward, back to the figure lying on the bed, the one smiling at him. The boy, or whatever it was, hadn't moved an inch. He was still smiling, that stretched, unnatural smile, eyes wide and unblinking. The corners of his lips twitched slightly, as if struggling to contain laughter. The father muttered, his voice breaking. His knees trembled, and instinctively, he reached a shaking hand toward the edge of the bed. The creature tilted its head, the grin widening in a way no human face should. Then, in a voice eerily similar to his son's, it whispered, "Good night, Daddy." The lights flickered. The father stumbled backward, hitting the dresser behind him. The lamp fell and shattered, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the faint light from the hallway seeped through the half-open door. From under the bed came the sound of quiet sobbing, the real boy, whispering again and again, "Don't let it touch me, Daddy. Please don't let it touch me." The figure on the bed slowly sat up. The air grew heavy, cold. Its bones cracked as it turned its head a full 90 degrees. Eyes now empty, black as the space beneath the bed. The father froze, every instinct screaming to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The creature smiled one last time, whispering through its teeth, "He's mine now." Then, silence. Only the wind outside, and the sound of a child's faint sobs fading into the dark. My grandfather Louise used to live on Rue Sergipe, right across from the cemetery in Snow Hollow. Back then, we're talking about the 1930s, the city was already alive with a constant hum of trams, cars, and people moving through the narrow streets. But my grandfather, weary from the clamor of the city, often chose a quieter route home. Instead of taking the long way around the blocks, he would cut straight through the cemetery. It wasn't unusual back then. The cemetery was calm, well-kept, and strangely peaceful. Rows of mausoleums lined the cobblestone paths like silent houses, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and wilted flowers. The world outside the walls felt miles away. Inside, there was only the whisper of wind, and the soft creak of the trees bowing over marble graves. My grandfather would always tell me it was the only place in Snow Hollow where the noise stopped. But of course, not everything in that silence was restful. He told me that many of his stories, and he had dozens, began in those walks through the city, of the lying down, as he called it. Some were born from real encounters, others from whispers passed down among grave diggers and street vendors. And some, I think, were inventions of his mind, stories he created, just to see the spark of fear in the eyes of whoever was listening. Still, whenever he told them, he made them real. His tone would drop, his gaze would drift somewhere far away, and the line between memory and imagination would blur until no one could tell the difference. One night, as I sat by his old wooden chair listening to the soft creak of the floorboards beneath him, he began one of those stories, one that I never forgot. He leaned back, cleared his throat, and said, "There I was, crossing the cemetery alone after dark, trying to take a shortcut home. The moon was full that night, pale and cold, washing over the graves like frost. Every step I took echoed in the silence. I tried not to look at the names carved into the stones, afraid that one might look back." He chuckled when he said that, but even in his old age, there was something in his voice, something that made me believe he wasn't joking entirely. Greater than, I remember thinking, he continued, how strange it is to walk through a city of the dead while being alive, feeling like an intruder in someone else's neighborhood. The wind was picking up, he said, whistling through the rows of tombs. His shadow, stretched and thin, danced on the cracked pathway. He pulled his coat tighter, his footsteps quickening just a little. Then, he noticed it. At first, he said, I thought it was the moon playing tricks on me. But when I looked up, I saw a shape moving ahead, a man, a tall figure walking in the same direction as me. The figure's pace matched his own. Whenever my grandfather slowed down, so did the man. When he sped up, the silhouette did too. It wasn't close enough to see clearly, just far enough that the movement seemed unnatural, like a shadow detached from the world. I remember thinking, finally, someone else is crossing tonight. Maybe I won't be so alone. So, relieved, he called out, "Good evening, sir." No answer, only the sound of footsteps, 2 sets now, echoing in perfect rhythm through the quiet cemetery. He tried again, louder this time. "Hey there, late night for a walk?" Huh? Still nothing. The man's head didn't turn. His steps never broke rhythm. That's when the unease began to creep in. The moonlight, bright as it was, seemed unable to touch the man. His outline was visible, yes, but flat, like a dark cutout against the world. My grandfather could hear the crunch of gravel beneath the man's boots, yet saw no shadow cast beside him. It was like the ground accepted his sound, but not his shape. My grandfather laughed when he said it, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He decided then that it was better to walk faster, to reach the gates and the glow of the street lamps beyond. But as he quickened his steps, so did the stranger behind him. The rhythm grew louder, closer, until, finally, the two were side by side. When he caught up, my grandfather said, I could feel my heart beating in my throat. I didn't dare look right away, but something in me, that stupid human curiosity, made me turn my head. The man was there, his face faintly visible under the moonlight, pale, expressionless eyes fixed forward. And so, to calm his nerves, my grandfather tried to make conversation. I'm glad you caught up, I said. I hate walking through here alone at night. The man turned his head slowly toward him, lips curling into a thin, almost polite smile. Then he answered, in a voice low and hollow as the grave. So did I when I was alive. I hated walking here alone too. For a moment, my grandfather said, his body refused to move. The words hung in the cold night air, almost visible, as if they had shape and weight. When I was alive, they echoed through him like the chime of a cracked bell. He turned his head sharply, searching the stranger's face again, but in the pale moonlight, it seemed different now. The man's skin was drained of all color, his lips faintly blue. His clothes, once appearing like an old overcoat, looked tattered and wet, as though he had walked through rain that never touched the living world. I wanted to think he was joking, my grandfather told me, his hands trembling as he spoke. But his eyes, they didn't blink. They just stared straight ahead. A chill swept through him, and the air suddenly felt heavier, colder. The cemetery, once quiet, began to murmur in soft whispers, the wind moving through dry flowers, the faint creak of gates shifting. He forced a laugh, hoping the sound of his own voice would drown out the fear rising in his chest. Good one, friend, he said. You almost got me there. but the man didn't reply. They continued walking side by side. Gravel crunched beneath their feet in perfect synchronization until my grandfather noticed something else. With each step, the sound of his own footsteps seemed to fade. Soon, there was only one set echoing against the stone. He stopped walking. The other man did not. The figure kept moving forward, slow and steady, until he passed a narrow path between two mausoleums. And then, without sound, without motion, without even a shadow, he was gone, just like that. The moonlight, bright as it was, seemed unable to touch the man. His outline was visible, yes, but flat, like a dark cutout against the world. My grandfather could hear the crunch of gravel beneath the man's boots, yet saw no shadow cast beside him. It was like the ground accepted his sound, but not his shape. My grandfather laughed when he said it, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He decided then that it was better to walk faster, to reach the gates and the glow of the street lamps beyond. But as he quickened his steps, so did the stranger behind him. The rhythm grew louder, closer, until, finally, the two were side by side. When he caught up, my grandfather said, "I could feel my heart beating in my throat." I didn't dare look right away, but something in me, that stupid human curiosity, made me turn my head. The man was there, his face faintly visible under the moonlight, pale, expressionless eyes fixed forward, and so, to calm his nerves, my grandfather tried to make conversation. "I'm glad you caught up," I said. "I hate walking through here alone at night." The man turned his head slowly toward him, lips curling into a thin, almost polite smile. Then he answered, in a voice low and hollow as the grave, "So did I when I was alive. I hated walking here alone too." For a moment, my grandfather said, his body refused to move. The words hung in the cold night air, almost visible, as if they had shape and weight. When I was alive, they echoed through him like the chime of a cracked bell. He turned his head sharply, searching the stranger's face again, but in the pale moonlight, it seemed different now. The man's skin was drained of all color, his lips faintly blue. His clothes, once appearing like an old overcoat, looked tattered and wet, as though he had walked through rain that never touched the living world. I wanted to think he was joking, my grandfather told me, his hands trembling as he spoke. But his eyes, they didn't blink, they just stared straight ahead. A chill swept through him, and the air suddenly felt heavier, colder. The cemetery, once quiet, began to murmur in soft whispers, the wind moving through dry flowers, the faint creak of gates shifting. He forced a laugh, hoping the sound of his own voice would drown out the fear rising in his chest. "Good one, friend," he said. "You almost got me there." But the man didn't reply. They continued walking side by side. Gravel crunched beneath their feet in perfect synchronization until my grandfather noticed something else. With each step, the sound of his own footsteps seemed to fade. Soon, there was only one set echoing against the stone. He stopped walking. The other man did not. The figure kept moving forward, slow and steady, until he passed a narrow path between two mausoleums. And then, without sound, without motion, without even a shadow, he was gone. Just like that. It was as if he had been erased from the world mid-step, my grandfather said. One second he was there, the next he was part of the darkness. Panic gripped him. He turned, scanning every direction, his breath bogging in the cold air. Nothing, only graves, statues, and the stillness of the dead. The moon, now half covered by a drifting cloud, dimmed the world into shades of gray. My grandfather began to run. His heart pounded violently in his chest. Every few seconds, he swore he heard a second pair of footsteps again, faint, behind him, always matching his pace. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The gate was just ahead, he said. I could see the lamps outside flickering. The living world, so close I could almost touch it. He ran harder, until he burst through the cemetery gate and stumbled into the street. The sudden roar of distant traffic and city, life greeted him like the sound of salvation. He turned around, expecting to see the stranger behind him, but there was nothing there, only the open gate, the silent graves, and the sigh of wind whispering through the iron bars. He stood there for a long time, catching his breath. Slowly, the normal rhythm of the night returned. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance, and the hum of snow hollow rolled faintly through the hills. Eventually, he began walking home. Every few steps, though, he'd glance back just to make sure. When he finally reached his apartment on Rue Sergipe, he bolted the door and sat in his chair by the window, the city's glow flickering across his face. He poured himself a small glass of cachaca, his hands still trembling, and muttered a prayer his mother had taught him as a boy. That night, he didn't sleep. You see, he told me years later, there are places in this world that belong to us, and there are places that don't. Cemeteries at night, they're not ours. Not really. Sometimes, the dead forget that too. He smiled when he said that, the kind of smile old men have when they know they're telling the truth. Then, after a pause, he added one last thing. I still cross the cemetery sometimes, even after all these years. It's quiet there, peaceful, but I never walk alone anymore. I always hear footsteps beside me, just one step behind, as if he's keeping me company. He chuckled, but his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room, were heavy and distant, reflecting something I couldn't see. And in that silence, I finally understood what he meant. Some stories don't need to be believed to be real. He arrived just before sunset, when the sky was painted in shades of dying orange and bruised violet. The bus dropped him off at the edge of a small, almost forgotten town, a place so quiet it seemed time had stopped caring about it. He was a traveling salesman, the kind of man who lived out of a suitcase and whose only constant companion was the ticking of cheap hotel clocks. That night, he just needed a bed, a hot shower, and silence. The sign of a small hotel flickered weakly at the corner of the main street. It wasn't luxurious, but it was open. Inside, the smell of old wood, lemon polish, and faint mildew filled the air. Behind the reception desk stood a young woman with dark hair tied into a bun, her skin pale against the dim yellow light. She smiled politely as he approached. "Good evening, sir. Looking for a room?" "Yes," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "For a few nights if possible," she nodded, flipping through a small registry book before pulling out a brass key. "Room 7, she said, sliding it across the counter. "Second floor, at the end of the corridor." As he turned to leave, she hesitated, her tone shifting ever so slightly. "Just one thing, sir," she said. "Next to your room, there's a door with no number. It's used for storage. It stays locked day and night. Please don't try to open it, and don't linger near it. It's hotel policy." He raised an eyebrow, half amused, half curious. "Storage, huh? Understood." The woman nodded but didn't smile this time. Her eyes lingered on him longer than comfort allowed. He shrugged off the unease and climbed the creaking staircase. The corridor was narrow and dimly lit, lined with faded wallpaper curling at the edges. His room was simple: a bed with a worn quilt, a desk, and a single lamp that hummed faintly when switched on. Across the narrow hallway stood the door, with no number. It looked ordinary enough, plain, white, and unremarkably yet something about it tugged at him. Maybe it was how the light from his lamp didn't seem to touch it completely, as if the wood absorbed illumination. He unpacked his things, ate a sandwich he'd bought earlier, and went to bed. That night, the wind howled through the narrow alleys outside, rattling the windows like a restless hand. Sometime after midnight, he awoke to a faint sound, the click of a doorknob turning softly. Somewhere in the hall, he listened. Silence. Then a whisper of fabric, as though someone were standing outside, breathing. He told himself it was nothing, the mind playing tricks after a long day. But sleep refused to return. The next morning, he laughed it off over breakfast, convincing himself he had only imagined it. The receptionist smiled politely when he handed over his key to be cleaned, but her eyes looked weary, as though she hadn't slept either. By the second night, curiosity had already rooted itself deep inside him. The door without a number waited, silent and patient. Around midnight, after pacing in circles for nearly an hour, he gave in. Quietly, he stepped into the corridor, the wooden floor groaning under his feet. He approached the door and tried the handle. It didn't move. It was indeed locked, just as she'd said. But his curiosity refused to stop there. He crouched down and peered through the keyhole. What he saw made his pulse quicken, not from fear, but confusion. It was just another room, almost identical to his own. There was a bed, a chair, a mirror on the wall, and sitting against the far wall, directly facing the door, was a woman. Her skin was pale, unnaturally so, as though every drop of color had been drained from her body. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. She simply stared at the door, at him, his breath hitched. He blinked once, twice, but she remained there, still as a statue. Finally, he stood and backed away, shaking his head. Probably some eccentric guest, or a trick of the light, he reasoned. Still, unease crawled beneath his skin as he returned to bed. That night, when he finally drifted into sleep, he dreamed of red eyes watching him through a hole in the dark. The next morning felt heavier, as if the air inside the hotel had thickened overnight. The traveler couldn't shake the image of that pale woman sitting silently in the room next door. At breakfast, the same young receptionist greeted him with her faint, practiced smile. But he noticed the way her eyes flickered when he mentioned the storage room. "It really is locked, isn't it?" he asked casually. "Though, I thought I saw someone inside." The spoon in her hand paused midair. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then she forced a small laugh, though her voice trembled slightly. "You must have seen your reflection. The keyhole glass can play tricks when the lights are low." He smiled politely, pretending to believe her, but her hands were shaking. He didn't ask anything else. By the time the evening shadows stretched across the wooden floors, curiosity had completely devoured any sense of caution he might have had. There was something unnatural about that door, something whispering to him when the corridor grew silent. Around midnight, he sat on his bed staring at the wall, listening again for the faintest noise from beyond that locked door. The wind outside had died, and all he could hear was the old building breathing, pipes creaking, wood settling, the distant ticking of a clock downstairs. Then it came a soft thump, like a heel tapping the floor once. Then again. He rose slowly, every step toward the door feeling heavier than the last. When he reached it, his hand trembled as he bent down once more, pressing his eye against the keyhole. At first he saw nothing, only darkness, but as his vision adjusted, he realized there was color, deep, vivid red filling the entire view, glowing faintly like a drop of blood under glass. He squinted, confused. The night before, he'd seen the pale woman. Now, there was only this strange red blur. He leaned closer, trying to make sense of it, when suddenly, he felt an icy breath seep through the keyhole and brush against his cheek. He stumbled backward, nearly falling. The air smelled faintly of iron. His heart pounded as he stared at the door, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. The hallway remained still. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. After several long minutes, he forced himself to go back inside his room and locked the door. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, dark circles shadowed his eyes. He decided he needed answers. The receptionist was behind the counter again, her expression distant, almost mournful. "I looked again," he said, his voice hoarse. "Last night, through the keyhole." Her face drained of color. "You shouldn't have done that." "I know what I saw," he insisted. "First, there was a woman, pale as paper, then just read. What is that room really?" She hesitated, glancing toward the empty hallway as though afraid someone might hear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "That room hasn't been rented in years. It used to be number 8, but after what happened, they removed the number entirely." He leaned closer. "What happened?" The woman swallowed hard, her fingers twisting around the edge of the counter. "A long time ago, a couple stayed there. Locals still remember. The husband and wife, they argued constantly. No one knew what about. One night, the guests heard screams, and by the time the police arrived, it was too late. He'd killed her." The traveler's throat went dry, and the receptionist's eyes lifted to his. "Her eyes," she whispered. "They say when the maid found her, she was lying against the wall just like you described. Her skin white as marble, but her eyes," she shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "They were bright red, like blood had drowned the whites. Some say she still sits there, waiting, and anyone who looks through that keyhole sees her eyes staring, back. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the lobby clock filled the silence between them. Finally, the traveler exhaled and tried to laugh, though the sound was hollow. "You're telling me I saw a ghost?" "I'm telling you," she said softly, "that the door's been locked ever since. No one's had the key for years." He turned to glance down the hall one last time. The door stood there, perfectly still. The paint cracked and faded, but even from this distance, he swore he could feel it watching him, waiting for him to look again. The hotel was silent, swallowed by the kind of darkness that presses against the walls and fills every breath with unease. The traveler lay in bed, eyes wide open, his body trembling as if the sheets were made of ice. Sleep refused to come. The tale the receptionist told him about the murdered woman, about her pale ghost and blood-red eyes, echoed through his head like a haunting lullaby. He tried to convince himself it was just a story meant to scare guests, a rumor to give the old hotel a touch of mystery. But then came the sound, soft, steady, a faint tapping from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. He froze, his pulse hammering against his chest. The noise came again, closer this time. His throat tightened, and against his better judgment, he rose from bed, bare feet meeting the cold floor. Every step toward the corridor felt heavier, as though invisible hands tried to hold him back. The hallway stretched before him like a throat made of shadow, the yellow bulbs flickering, buzzing weakly as if struggling to stay alive. At the far end was the door, with no number, the forbidden door, and though reason screamed for him to turn back, curiosity was stronger than fear. He stopped before it, heart pounding. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a silence so deep it rang in his ears. He leaned closer, pressing one trembling hand against the wooden frame. It was freezing, as if the door itself exhaled the chill of a grave. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening. Then, just as he was about to step away, a whisper seeped through the voice so faint it might have been his imagination. "Help me," it said. The words were barely audible, almost swallowed by the dark, but unmistakably human. The traveler's blood ran cold. He hesitated only a second before bending down, placing his eye to the keyhole once again. At first, nothing, just an impenetrable red haze, glowing softly, pulsing like a living thing. But then movement, a shape shifting within the red, slow and deliberate, until the faint outline of a face began to emerge. Two orbs opened where eyes should be, glowing a shade of crimson that burned straight into his mind. He stumbled backward, a strangled sound caught in his throat. He turned to flee, but the corridor behind him no longer looked the same. The lights were dimming one by one, the air growing heavy, thick like water. His body moved sluggishly, as if the world itself resisted his escape. The wooden floor groaned beneath him, stretching, bending, warping. From somewhere behind, a door creaked open. He didn't need to look to know which one. A cold breeze swept through the hallway, carrying with it the faint scent of iron and rot. A voice called his name, soft, melodic, and soaked in sorrow. "Don't leave me here." He ran, heart slamming against his ribs, but each step seemed to bring him no closer to the staircase. The corridor twisted and looped back upon itself, an endless maze of flickering lights and whispering walls. He turned once more and saw her standing in front of the open door, the pale woman from the locked room. Her dress was white, drenched in something dark, and her eyes, those terrible, red, bleeding eyes, glowed brighter than before. She didn't walk, she drifted. The walls around her darkened, absorbing the light, as if the building itself bent to her will. The traveler fell to his knees, gasping, words dying in his mouth. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean to." But she was already before him, her face inches from his, her voice no longer a whisper, but a scream that shook the walls. "You shouldn't have looked," she shrieked, and the red from her eyes spilled outward, flooding the hallway like liquid fire. His vision dissolved into crimson. Pain seared through his body as if his veins had turned to glass. The last thing he saw was the woman's face, half sorrow, half rage, before everything went black. When the hotel staff found the room the next morning, the traveler was gone. The door without a number remained locked, but now the keyhole was sealed shut, no longer silver, but a deep, dark red. Some say on quiet nights, when the wind crawls through the old corridors, you can still hear the faint tapping of his footsteps, followed by a whisper that chills the blood. Don't look. It was a cold, drizzly evening when Mara arrived in the small, nearly abandoned town of Greymore. She had come seeking solitude, a brief escape from the unrelenting chaos of city life, and she had rented an old house at the edge of the woods, a structure that looked as if it had been untouched for decades. The townspeople had been polite but strangely evasive when she asked about the house's history. Some muttered about old tragedies, others quickly changed the subject. Mara didn't mind. She was accustomed to silence and shadows. She carried her bags inside, the floorboards groaning beneath her steps as if warning her against crossing the threshold. Dust floated in the air, disturbed only by her careful movements. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, faded from a time when the house had once been lively. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As night fell, Mara unpacked her things and tried to settle in. The flickering light of a single lamp barely penetrated the corners of the room, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. She could swear that the shadows moved when she wasn't looking directly at them, curling along the edges of the furniture like living things. A soft whispering began somewhere in the house, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the hum of the wind through the broken window panes. Mara froze, straining to listen. The whispering was not a language she recognized, but it carried a distinct sense of malice, a hunger that made her stomach churn. She told herself it was the wind, or perhaps an animal trapped in the walls. She tried to laugh at the irrational fear rising in her chest, but the laugh caught in her throat as the whispers grew louder, forming words that were almost intelligible. Go, leave now. Determined not to succumb to fear, Mara explored the house. She wandered through the narrow corridors and the staircases that creaked with each step, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every door she opened revealed nothing but emptiness and dust, yet she felt eyes following her, unseen and oppressive. In the kitchen, the cupboards were slightly ajar, as if someone or something had been rifling through them moments before. Mara shook her head, telling herself it was her imagination. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps above her, slow and deliberate, pacing the floorboards of the second story. Her heart leaped. There was no one else in the house, and yet the sound was undeniable. She called out, her voice trembling. Hello? Is someone there? Only silence answered her, thick and suffocating, broken by the whispering that had now become a low, mournful chant. Hours passed, and sleep became impossible. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, flashlight in hand, listening to the sounds that seemed to crawl along the walls. The whispers were relentless now, echoing from room to room, forming phrases that sounded like threats. You should not be here. You belong outside. Forever. The air felt colder, denser, as if the house itself were inhaling, drawing her into its dark heart. Shadows moved with intent, stretching across the floor, brushing against her feet and then vanishing. Mara's mind raced with possibilities, some rational, most terrifyingly irrational. She considered leaving, but her car was stuck in the mud outside, the storm worsening with each passing minute. She was trapped, and yet, she could not shake the feeling that leaving was exactly what the house wanted her to do, that it craved her fear, that it thrived on her panic. Somewhere deep inside, a primal instinct screamed that the house had been waiting for her, watching her from the moment she stepped across its threshold, biding its time. The night deepened, and the whispers evolved into voices, multiple tones overlapping in discordant harmony. Mara could hear faint laughter, high-pitched and brittle, followed by sobs that pierced the darkness. She felt the weight of unseen hands brushing against her arms, fleeting and cold. Every shadow now seemed to pulse with life, as if the walls themselves were breathing. She tried to convince herself she was alone, that the house was nothing more than rotting wood and old memories. Yet, deep down, she knew better. There was intelligence here, a cunning, patient awareness that regarded her every move. The final confirmation came when she glanced toward the corner of the room and froze. A figure stood there, pale and barely discernible. But its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, staring directly at her, unmoving, unblinking, and entirely unhuman. Mara swallowed hard. Her blood ran cold. She realized, in a surge of terror, that the whispers, the footsteps, the shadows, they had all been leading to this moment. The house was no longer merely haunted. It was alive. Mara's breath caught in her throat as the pale figure remained frozen in the corner, watching her with those unblinking eyes. The room seemed to stretch unnaturally, shadows elongating as if the walls themselves were alive, shifting closer to her. Her fingers trembled around the flashlight, the beam flickering and casting grotesque shapes across the peeling wallpaper. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet her legs refused to move. The whispering grew louder, now forming multiple voices that overlapped in a chaotic harmony, a cruel symphony meant to torment. "You can't leave. You belong to us." The words, though barely intelligible, sank into her mind like icy tendrils, wrapping around her thoughts and freezing them. She tried to scream, but only a strained, hoarse whisper escaped. A sudden clatter came from upstairs, breaking her paralysis. Footsteps again, faster now, pounding across the floorboards above her. Mara's pulse raced. Her body felt heavy, as if the house itself was pressing down on her, pinning her in place. She stumbled toward the door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. Her hands were slick with sweat, and the whispers seemed to encircle her, echoing from every corner. The figure in the corner began to move, gliding silently across the floor with a grace that defied natural movement, its head tilted slightly, as though amused by her struggle. Mara's mind reeled. The house wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, designed to ensnare anyone who dared enter. Every horror story she had, dismissed as fiction, now pressed against her, reality with suffocating weight. Frantically, she tried to recall any details about the house, from the rental agreement or the townspeople's warnings, anything that might offer guidance. But the memories felt distant, clouded by the oppressive atmosphere. Then, a door she hadn't noticed before creaked open slightly, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. Against her better judgment, she stepped forward. The whispering shifted, following her, as if the house itself were breathing, alive and sentient. She felt the temperature drop, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Shadows danced along the walls, reaching toward her with elongated skeletal fingers. The hallway seemed endless, stretching farther than possible, every step echoing ominously behind her. A feeling of inevitability pressed against her chest. Something was waiting at the end of this path, something that had been anticipating her arrival. Her flashlight flickered, casting a final erratic beam onto the floor. Mara caught a glimpse of something moving just out of reach, a shadow that darted ahead and then vanished. She froze, straining her ears, only to hear a whisper directly behind her ear, cold and guttural. "You should never have come." She spun around, but the figure was gone. The door she had entered through had vanished, replaced by solid wall. Panic surged through her, raw and consuming. She was trapped. The house had claimed her as it had claimed others before her, feeding on fear and despair, thriving on the terror of those who dared to linger. Mara's heart pounded violently, her senses on high alert as every creak, every whisper, every shadow became a threat. She realized with growing horror that the house didn't just want her. Fear it wanted her submission. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening cacophony, and the pale figure reappeared at the far end of the hallway, closer now, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Mara's legs trembled as she forced herself to take another step forward. The hallway stretching infinitely before her, the air grew thicker, a suffocating presence that seemed to seep into her lungs, making each breath a laborious task. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that reached out as if to grab her. The whispers became coherent words, repeating her name over and over, a sinister lullaby that promised torment. "Mara, Mara, stay forever." Her flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, she saw dozens of pale faces staring at her from the walls, their mouths moving in silent screams. Her mind reeled. Panic clawed at her sanity as she realized the house was alive, feeding off her fear, amplifying it. She stumbled forward, heart hammering, sweat mingling with cold as the oppressive energy pressed down harder. The pale figure at the end of the hallway had grown taller, more defined, its eyes burning like coals in the darkness. Mara tried to speak, to demand it leave, but no. Words came out only a strangled gasp. Suddenly, the figure raised its arm, pointing toward a staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. Compelled by an instinct she could not resist, Mara descended, each step creaking ominously beneath her weight. The whispers followed her now, louder, almost chanting. As she reached the bottom, the air became frigid, her breath visible in the dim light, and she realized the basement was filled with objects that seemed impossibly old, relics of those who had come before her. Shadows moved independently of any light source, flickering and stretching in impossible directions. In the center of the room, a circle of candles illuminated a figure sitting cross-legged, chanting in a language Mara did not understand. Her stomach churned with dread as she recognized the pale figure from the hallway now, standing behind the seated figure. Guiding it, the chanting grew louder, and Mara felt an invisible force pressing her to her knees. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, as though the house's heartbeat synchronized with her own, hammering faster and faster until she felt dizzy and weak. She struggled to focus, her fear threatening to overwhelm her completely. A voice echoed from the seated figure, ancient and malevolent. "You cannot leave. You are ours now. Your fear nourishes us." Mara's mind raced for any escape. She remembered the old tales of houses feeding on the living, the warnings from townspeople who spoke of the cursed estate. The candlelight flickered, and she realized that the only way to survive was to confront the source. Summoning every ounce of courage, she shouted, "I am not yours." The chanting faltered, the pale figure recoiling slightly. Shadows shrieked in protest, lashing out like whips. She grabbed a heavy rusted candlestick from the floor and swung it at the figure, who vanished into smoke, leaving the circle of candles flickering alone. Mara felt the oppressive weight lift slightly, the whispers fading into indistinct murmurs. With trembling hands, she ran up the stairs, the hallways now appearing shorter, less distorted. The walls, once alive with grotesque faces, now seemed inert, as if the house had been wounded by her defiance. She flung open the front door and stumbled outside into the cold night air, gasping for the fresh breeze. The house loomed behind her, silent but still watching, as if marking her as a survivor, but not yet free of its influence. Mara understood then that the house had released her, but only partially. It remained, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. Hungering for fear, ready to ensnare again. Her escape had been a victory, but the memory of its whispers, the pale figures, and the endless hallway would haunt her forever. I'm your dream companion, the one who helps you unwind after a long, busy day. Before you drift off to sleep, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? What time is it there? Now take a deep breath, get comfortable in bed, and come with me because the night is just beginning, and this story is all yours. The forest was thick and endless, its canopy swallowing the light of the late afternoon. 5 friends had been walking for hours, their voices cracking with exhaustion and fear. The trail they thought would lead them back to the campsite had disappeared behind them, replaced by a maze of identical trees and whispering wind. The sound of footsteps crunching over leaves echoed strangely, as if someone else were walking just behind them. But every time they turned around, there was nothing. Dusk fell quickly, and the air grew colder. Their flashlights flickered in the encroaching dark, and the silence was broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Then, from between the trees, they saw a faint orange glow, a campfire. Relieved, they ran toward it, calling out until the shape of a man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, wearing an old, torn coat, and carried an axe slung over his shoulder. His face was half hidden by a beard and the brim of his hat, but his voice was calm when he spoke. "You're lost," he said simply. They nodded, trembling with fatigue and relief. "There's a small town not far from here," he continued. "Follow me. I know the way." None of them hesitated. His presence felt oddly reassuring, though something about him, his stillness, maybe, or the way the firelight didn't quite touch his eyes, sent a chill crawling down their spines. As they walked, the forest seemed to part for him, paths forming naturally beneath his boots. The group followed in silence, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the cold night. No one noticed that the woods behind them had gone completely silent, as if even the wind dared not disturb the man who led them. The group followed the old man through the winding woods, their flashlights flickering weakly against the curtain of darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and their breath fogged in the cold. Every so often, one of them would glance at the stranger's back. His coat looked old, like something from another time, worn at the seams and darkened with years of use. Yet he moved with a steady, effortless pace, never hesitating, never looking around to find the way. It was as if he had walked that path 1,000 times. The forest thinned, and a faint mist began to gather along the ground, swirling around their ankles like smoke. The friends whispered among themselves, relieved, perhaps, that someone had found them, but unsettled by the man's silence. When one of them tried to start a conversation, asking his name, he replied simply, "Iageloso." The name felt strange on their tongues, foreign, almost heavy. They walked for what felt like hours, though none of them could tell how much time had passed. The moon rose high above the trees, pale and enormous, and for a moment, they thought they could see rooftops glimmering in the distance. "The town," one of them whispered. He was right. Hope surged through their chests, warming them from the inside out. But then, as they drew closer, something strange began to happen. The temperature dropped sharply, and the mist thickened until it obscured their vision. The man ahead of them grew fainter in the haze, his outline blurring. "Sir," one of them called out, "wait for us." No answer. They hurried forward, stumbling through the fog, hearts pounding, and then, as suddenly as it had come, the mist cleared. They were standing on a dirt road that led to the small, sleeping town below. The sound of the forest had vanished completely, and so had the man named Iad. For a long moment, no one spoke. The forest behind them stood silent, like a wall of black glass, and the town below glowed faintly under the ghostly light of the moon. "Where did he go?" someone whispered. They turned in circles, calling out his name, but only their own voices answered back, dull and distant. One of them pointed toward the dirt path. There were footprints in the soft soil, large and deep, leading all the way from the woods. But halfway down the slope, the prints simply stopped, as if the man had vanished into thin air. Panic crept into their chests. "Maybe he took another path," one of them offered weakly, but his voice trembled. None of them believed it. They began walking again, faster this time, until the first faint lights of the town came into view. When they finally reached the main street, the quiet was almost comforting. A few shops still had lanterns glowing in the windows. They spotted a small convenience store and went inside, desperate for warmth, for noise, for the simple company of someone alive. The woman behind the counter looked startled when she saw them, muddy, pale, exhausted. "We got lost in the woods," one of them explained breathlessly. "A man helped us find the way." "A lumberjack named Iageloso." The woman froze. For a second, her expression was unreadable, then slowly drained of color. She repeated softly, "That's not possible." Her husband came from the back room, frowning. When he heard the name, his face went as pale as hers. The man's voice was low when he finally spoke. "You must be mistaken. Iageloso died in those woods years ago. There was an accident, a tree fell on him while he was working. No one's seen him since." A heavy silence filled the room. The group exchanged uneasy glances, thinking of the man's quiet voice, his steady steps, the way the woods had seemed to move aside for him. One of them, hands shaking, pulled out a phone. "We took a picture with him," she said. "You'll see." She opened the photo and the color drained from her face. The group leaned in close, hearts pounding, and stared. They were all there, standing on the forest path, smiling nervously at the camera. But between them, where the lumberjack should have been, there was only empty air and a faint human-shaped shadow. The room was deathly silent, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock the only sounds. The group stared at the phone in disbelief. How could someone so tangible, so real, be missing from the photograph entirely? They remembered every detail: the rough hands, the smell of pine, the steady pace as he led them down the path. And now, looking at the image, it was as if none of it had ever existed. The shadow where he should have been seemed to shimmer faintly, like it belonged neither to the forest nor to the world they knew. A chill crept down their spines. One of them whispered, "It's like he never existed, like he was never real." But the lingering smell of sawdust and the memory of his voice denied that. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the small shop. The group felt the weight of the woods pressing in on them, even from this distance. Every laugh, every crack of the night from the forest earlier, came back vividly. They could feel his presence, though invisible, lingering just beyond the edge of the town. One of the friends, trying to break the tension, asked, "But how?" "He guided us. He spoke to us. He saved us from getting lost." The shopkeeper's gaze was heavy, filled with sorrow and warning. The forest, it doesn't forget. Iageloso never left. Some spirits remain to guide, some to watch. He protects travelers, but he isn't one of the living anymore. Sometimes, the ones who see him don't realize it until it's too late to understand what they've experienced. The friends left the shop, minds spinning, trying to reconcile what they had seen. They walked through the quiet streets, the town's warm lights casting long shadows, each one stretching like a hand reaching for them. Every time they glanced back toward the woods, a sense of being watched prickled their skin. That faint human-shaped shadow seemed to follow them, lingering in the corner of their eyes, impossible to shake. Phones out, they tried to take more pictures of the path leading back to the forest. But each image revealed nothing but trees and empty ground. He was there, and he wasn't a presence that defied explanation. By the time they reached the edge of town, they understood a terrifying truth. Iageloso wasn't just a memory or a ghost story. He was a guardian of the woods, a spirit who bridged life and death, yet his existence was fragile, visible only to those who needed him. They realized that their adventure had ended. But the shadow of the forest and of Iageloso would follow them forever, haunting the edges of every memory, every photograph, a silent reminder that some things in this world can never be fully explained, and some spirits, no matter how kind, are not meant to be seen by the living. A man and a woman had been searching for the perfect home for months. They had visited countless houses, but nothing seemed right. Either the price was too high, the location inconvenient, or the structure required too many repairs. One day, however, they came across a modest house that was priced lower than expected. It had some structural issues, cracks in the walls, and a few tiles missing from the roof. But the couple saw potential. They decided it was worth the investment and purchased the home. Planning to renovate it little by little over time, they moved in with hope and excitement, ready to create their ideal living space. The first few weeks were quiet, and everything seemed normal, except for one strange occurrence that began almost immediately. Every night, at exactly midnight, the doorbell rang. The couple would hurry to the entrance, only to find no one there. They checked the front yard, the street, and even the surrounding houses, but no visitor ever appeared. The phenomenon continued night after night, and the couple slowly began to grow uneasy. They tried to rationalize it, thinking perhaps it was a prank by teenagers in the neighborhood or an old electrical fault in the system, but deep down, they knew something was off. One night, the man decided to investigate more closely. He approached the door quietly, watching through the peephole. To his shock, he saw the doorbell button moving up and down on its own, as if an invisible hand were pressing it. No one was there. His heart raced, but curiosity forced him to stay and observe. Every night thereafter, he would watch the button, and each time, it pressed itself exactly at midnight. The couple started speaking in hushed tones about the strange occurrences, wondering what could be causing it. Days went by, and the oddities did not stop. One afternoon, a friend of the woman came to visit. She spent time chatting in the living room before stepping into the garden alone. Moments later, she came running back inside, pale and wide-eyed. She claimed she had seen a small creature, tiny goblin or elf, standing by the flowers, smiling and waving at her before disappearing into thin air. The woman laughed nervously, trying to convince her friend that it was her imagination, that perhaps the shadows and sunlight had played a trick. Yet the visitor was adamant. She had seen it clearly, and the sight had terrified her. The woman brushed it off, but the incident planted a seed of doubt. Later, another friend visited and reported the same experience. The small, mischievous figure had appeared again, observing from the garden before vanishing. By now, the woman could no longer deny that something unusual was happening. She turned to her husband, describing both encounters and urging him to take the events seriously. But he remained skeptical, insisting there had to be a logical explanation. He refused to believe in ghosts or magical creatures. The woman, however, felt a growing sense of unease, sensing that the house held secrets beyond their understanding. The nights continued. The clock struck 12, and the doorbell rang again. The invisible hand pressed it. The small creature observed them from afar, and the couple slowly realized that their new home might not be as ordinary as it seemed. As the weeks passed, the strange events in the house grew more unsettling. The midnight doorbell continued to ring without fail, and the couple could no longer ignore it. Every night the man would cautiously approach the door, his heart hammering in his chest, only to witness the button pressing itself as though guided by an unseen force. The repetition of the event made them both anxious, leaving a lingering sense of unease that no amount of rational thinking could dispel. The house that once promised comfort and security now felt like a living entity, watching them, testing them, waiting. One afternoon, the man was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he noticed something unusual. Plates and cutlery that he had just placed on the counter began to disappear before his eyes. He blinked, thinking he might be imagining things, but the silverware was truly gone. Turning around, he saw a small figure, barely more than a foot tall, clutching the dishes and staring at him with a mischievous grin. It was the same goblin-like creature his wife's friends had seen. Its eyes twinkled with playful malice as it held the stolen utensils. The man froze, unsure whether to scream or simply watch in disbelief. The tiny being seemed almost to enjoy the shock it had caused, and after a few moments, it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the man alone in the quiet kitchen, plates gone and a sense of dread settling over him. The woman returned home that evening, finding her husband pale and shaken. He recounted the incident, and she finally admitted that the strange occurrences could no longer be dismissed as mere imagination. Together, they began to notice patterns. The creature appeared, mostly during moments when they were alone or distracted. It seemed to enjoy minor chaos, moving objects, creating small disturbances, and disappearing before they could confront it. The once warm and welcoming home was slowly transforming into a place where the couple constantly felt watched and tested. That night, curiosity overcame fear. The man stayed awake, determined to catch a glimpse of the mysterious visitor. He hid near the kitchen, eyes fixed on the counter, waiting. At exactly midnight, he saw movement. The tiny figure emerged from the shadows, gliding silently across the floor with the stolen utensils clutched in its hands. Its presence was surreal, barely tangible, yet undeniably there. The man wanted to call out, to demand answers, but fear rooted him to the spot. The creature paused, looked directly at him, and let out a high-pitched, almost musical giggle. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving only a faint echo and an unshakable feeling of being tested. The couple realized that their house was no ordinary home. It had a guardian of sorts, perhaps a trickster spirit that relished in their unease. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every midnight chime of the bell seemed to be a reminder that they were not alone. Sleep became restless, conversation cautious, and their once joyful renovations now felt overshadowed by the presence of the small, enigmatic creature. Each night brought anticipation and fear, a delicate balance between curiosity and dread. The goblin, or whatever it truly was, had claimed a space in their lives, and the couple could not ignore it any longer. Their home was alive with secrets, and the mysterious visitor was just the beginning. The couple grew increasingly desperate to understand the nature of their tiny visitor. Each night, the goblin, or whatever it truly was, appeared more audacious, not only stealing small items but also rearranging furniture, hiding keys, and occasionally leaving odd trinkets in unusual places. It was as if the creature had a personality, an intention beyond mere mischief. The couple began documenting every incident, noting the time, location, and what had been taken or moved. They spoke cautiously, whispering when the creature was near, afraid that even the sound of their voices might provoke it further. One evening, after returning from a day of errands, the woman found the living room transformed. Chairs were stacked in precarious towers, books scattered across the floor, and a faint trail of crumbs led from the kitchen to the fireplace. At the end of the trail, the little goblin sat perched atop a pile of books, holding a tiny candle in one hand and a spoon in the other. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and it seemed almost to beckon them closer. The woman froze, heart pounding, but the man stepped forward, speaking in a calm voice. "We mean no harm. We just want to understand you." The creature tilted its head, as if considering his words. Then, with a sudden leap, it vanished into the shadows, leaving only a soft giggle behind. The next few nights were eerily quiet, and the couple wondered if their attempt to communicate had changed the goblin's behavior, but the silence was deceptive. On the 7th night, the doorbell rang again, though it wasn't midnight tanned. They discovered all of their missing utensils neatly arranged on the doorstep, accompanied by a small note scribbled in what looked like red ink. It read, "Respect my home, and I respect yours." The message was clear. The creature was not merely playing pranks. It was asserting its presence and its rules. The couple realized they had been intruders in a space already claimed by a being that did not follow human logic or conventions, determined to coexist rather than battle the mysterious presence. They adjusted their routines. They left small offerings, simple meals, coins, tiny ornaments at the places the creature seemed to favor. Nights became tense, but less chaotic. The goblin accepted the offerings, sometimes leaving small gifts in return: a polished pebble, a perfectly folded napkin, a feather carefully placed on a chair. Slowly, a form of uneasy understanding developed. Though the house remained unpredictable, the couple learned that their fear could be tempered with respect and careful observation. They were no longer simply victims of a trickster spirit. They had become participants in a delicate balance, negotiating peace with the supernatural. The lessons of the small, elusive visitor were profound. It was a reminder that the world contained forces beyond human comprehension, that homes could hold secrets and guardians hidden in plain sight. The goblin was not malevolent in the traditional sense. It was a creature of rules, of boundaries, and of tests. Each midnight ring of the doorbell, each disappeared spoon or plate, became a challenge to the couple's patience and ingenuity. Through this, they discovered that fear could be transformed into cautious respect. That understanding did not always require domination or confrontation. The house, alive with its small, enigmatic guardian, became a place of wonder as much as trepidation, a constant reminder that the unseen world was never truly absent. Over time, the couple began to adapt to the rhythm of the house and its small, mysterious guardian. The goblin's presence, though unsettling at first, became a part of their nightly routine. They learned to anticipate its movements and recognize the subtle signs that it had been nearby: a faint shuffle of feet, a soft giggle, the sudden misplacement of a kitchen utensil. The house itself seemed to respond to the creature's moods, the shadows lengthening when it was restless and retreating when it was calm. The couple realized that living with the goblin required more than courage. It required attentiveness, patience, and a willingness to respect a set of rules that they could not fully understand. One evening, as winter winds howled outside, the woman noticed something different. The goblin appeared at the edge of the dining table, holding a small bundle wrapped in a leaf. Its eyes, once glowing mischievously, now seemed almost solemn. The couple approached cautiously, hearts racing. The creature placed the bundle gently in the center of the table and vanished into the shadows without a sound. Inside, they found tiny carved figurines, each resembling a member of their household. It was as if the goblin was acknowledging their presence, their efforts to coexist, and offering a symbol of acceptance in return. The gesture left them awestruck. They realized that the goblin was not merely a trickster or thief, but a being capable of recognition and subtle gratitude. With this understanding, the disturbances in the house became less frequent. The goblin no longer took items indiscriminately, but instead engaged in subtle communication through small acts, moving objects to highlight forgotten corners, leaving cryptic messages of leaves or twigs arranged in patterns, or creating faint paths of crumbs to indicate where they should look. The couple responded with care, observing and interpreting the signs, rather than reacting in fear. Slowly, a fragile bond emerged. The goblin respected the humans who respected it, and the humans learned that the unseen world was not always malevolent. It simply operated according to its own logic. Years passed, and the house, once a source of terror, became a place of quiet wonder. The couple, now accustomed to the nighttime rituals, no longer felt dread when the doorbell rang at midnight or when utensils disappeared, only to reappear in unexpected places. They accepted the presence of the goblin as part of their home, understanding that the boundaries between the human world and the unseen were delicate and must be navigated with care. The small creature, enigmatic and sometimes mischievous, remained a constant reminder that not all forces could be controlled or fully comprehended. It taught them humility, patience, and the value of coexistence with the unknown. The goblin, for its part, seemed to thrive on this understanding. It became less secretive and more expressive in subtle ways, leaving small treasures or markings that spoke directly to the couple's attentiveness. Life in the house continued, a blend of ordinary human routines and extraordinary, silent interactions with the unseen. The midnight doorbell, once a symbol of fear, became a familiar signal of presence. The shadows, once threatening, now hinted at mysteries to respect, rather than threats to flee. The couple had learned a powerful lesson, that fear could be transformed into respect, that the unseen could be understood not through force, but through observation and care, and that even the smallest beings could leave a profound mark on human lives. One night, a man was driving along a lonely highway, exhausted from a long day on the road. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a small hotel sign flickering in the distance. Feeling the need for rest, he decided to stop. Pulling into the parking lot, the air immediately seemed heavier, colder, though he shrugged it off as fatigue. He entered the lobby, where a dimly lit space greeted him. A bell rang as he approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a pale woman with piercing eyes, handed him his key. She spoke quietly but firmly. "On your floor, there is a room without a number. Do not look through the keyhole or knock on the door. It is forbidden." The man nodded politely, but his curiosity stirred. Carrying his suitcase, He rode the elevator up, feeling a subtle chill brush past him as the doors closed. The hotel hallway was unusually silent, the kind of silence that made every small creak of the floorboards sound like a scream. As he passed the unnumbered door, a shiver ran down his spine. There was something about it, something unnatural, almost breathing in the shadows. He hurried past, telling himself it was just his imagination. When he reached his room, he dropped his bag, turned on the lights, and tried to relax. He had dinner and watched some television, attempting to distract himself from the strange sense of unease that lingered from the hallway. But as the night deepened, curiosity gnawed at him. That mysterious door would not leave his thoughts. Why was it forbidden? What could possibly be behind it? He tried to sleep, but every sound, the creak of the radiator, the whisper of the wind through the cracked window, pulled his mind back to that door. Unable to resist, he finally rose from the bed and walked cautiously back to the unnumbered room. The hallway seemed longer, darker. Shadows clung to the corners like living things. Standing in front of the door, he pressed his eye to the keyhole. What he saw made him gasp and stumble backward. The room was bathed in a deep, unnatural red, like the walls themselves had been painted in blood. In the center, a woman in white stood with her back to him. Her presence exuded a chilling aura, yet she didn't move. The man's heart raced. He stumbled away, nearly tripping, and returned to his own room. Sleep became impossible. Every creak and groan of the old building made him flinch. Imagining the woman turning to look at him, eyes burning, crimson, face pale and lifeless. The man sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, trying to convince himself that it had been a trick of the light, a shadow from the red drapes. But the image of the woman stayed burned in his mind. How could she be there, seemingly alive, yet completely still? He tried to rationalize it, saying it was a reflection, or maybe someone the hotel staff had hidden in that room. But his instincts screamed that something supernatural was present. The forbidden nature of the room now pressed on him more than ever. That very warning from the receptionist, the strict prohibition, suddenly felt like a lifeline he had ignored. He couldn't shake the fear creeping into every corner of his mind. Every passing moment, he felt as though unseen eyes were watching him from the darkened hallway. The room with no number loomed larger in his imagination than it had in reality. He could almost feel the red glow emanating through the door, as if the walls themselves were alive. Unable to endure the tension, he tried to sleep again. But each creak of the floor, each whisper of wind made him imagine the woman turning, her eyes wide, staring directly at him. Eventually, exhaustion overcame his fear, and he drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. Morning arrived, gray and still. He quickly packed his things, eager to leave, and returned the key to the receptionist. She looked at him with an unreadable expression and asked softly, "Did you see it?" He froze, the words stuck in his throat. Finally he admitted, "I looked through the keyhole." The receptionist's face darkened. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling almost imperceptibly. "I warned you. That room, it is cursed. Many years ago, a woman died there under suspicious circumstances. Her spirit never left. Those who dared to peek through the keyhole, they rarely lived long after." Twisted with dread. A cold sweat ran down his back. He remembered the deep red room, the woman in white, her stillness and the terrifying weight of her presence. He shivered, realizing that the simple act of curiosity might have condemned him. Fear gnawed at his chest as he considered that he could be among the unlucky ones who would soon face a fate worse than death. He left the hotel as quickly as possible, glancing over his shoulder at the unnumbered room. For a moment, he thought he saw the red glow flicker, though he couldn't tell if it was a trick of the early morning light or something else. His hands trembled as he drove away, the image of the woman still etched in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the receptionist's warning. What if she was right? What if the spirits of that cursed room followed him, waiting for the moment to claim those who dared look? The highway stretched before him, empty and silent, yet he felt the lingering presence of the hotel. Every shadow on the road seemed alive, moving unnaturally. His imagination ran wild, haunted by the image of the woman's pale face. Her eyes turned toward him in judgment. He tried to convince himself he was safe, that the hotel and its ghostly resident were behind him, but a cold chill in the car made him shiver. He realized that curiosity often came at a steep price, and some warnings should never be ignored. He never spoke of the experience to anyone, and the memory remained locked in his mind like a forbidden secret. Over the years, whenever he saw a hotel or passed a lonely building along the highway at night, his hands would tighten on the steering wheel. The memory of that room, the red glow, the woman in white, the deadly warning haunted him. He understood, in a way he had never understood before, that some places are not just buildings. They are traps, warnings, or prisons for restless spirits that linger far longer than anyone expects. Even today, he sometimes dreams of the hotel. In the dream, the red light grows brighter, and the woman turns her head slowly to reveal her lifeless, ghostly eyes staring straight at him. He wakes in a cold sweat, heart pounding, reminded that the supernatural often lies just beyond the veil, waiting for curiosity to cross its threshold. The memory of that night and the receptionist's words never left him. Those who look rarely live long after. The story of that cursed hotel spread quietly among the locals, whispered in hushed tones over time. Travelers who dared to stay there spoke of the unnumbered room, each retelling adding more fear. Some claimed to hear footsteps at night, faint cries, or the soft rustle of a dress across empty halls. The hotel staff, now long replaced, left behind only warnings, written notes in the lobby reminding visitors never to disturb the room. Yet, despite the stories, curiosity persisted. Some people could not resist peering into the forbidden space, each one adding to the curse that had haunted the woman for decades. The man never returned to the highway, avoiding the hotel entirely, yet he remained vigilant. He warned friends and strangers alike, but few understood. Those who heard the tale often dismissed it as a simple ghost story, not realizing that the danger was real and precise. Some nights, in quiet moments, he would swear he felt the presence again, a cold, watching sensation creeping along his spine. He realized that certain places, certain events, leave a mark on the soul, and the price of curiosity can be far higher than expected. Over time, he accepted that he had glimpsed something beyond human understanding. The woman in white, the room painted in red, and the chilling warning from the receptionist were not mere illusions. They were remnants of a tragedy, a spirit trapped in eternal torment, and those who intrude unknowingly risked a fate equally grim. Each retelling of the experience reinforced the lesson: respect the boundaries set by forces beyond comprehension, and never look through the keyhole. The highway remained quiet, the hotel a looming shadow against the night sky, and somewhere inside, the unnumbered room waited, its red glow ready to ensnare the next curious traveler who dared to cross the threshold, a silent, deadly trap awaiting the unwary. In the heart of a sprawling, bustling city, there existed a park of 15 hectares, a green oasis amidst the chaos of concrete and steel. People from all corners of the metropolis frequented it, drawn to its wide-open spaces, winding paths, and serene ponds that reflected the sunlight in 1,000 shimmering hues. The park was not only a haven for humans seeking solace or exercise. It was home to a group of remarkably gentle dogs, each one friendly, calm, and affectionate. For years, the bond between the parkgoers and these animals had been a cherished ritual. Runners would greet them in the morning, joggers would pass by in the evening, and children would play with the dogs as if they were long-lost friends. The dogs roamed freely, yet they never strayed far from the trails, seemingly aware of the park's boundaries and the people they had grown attached to. There was a comforting rhythm to their presence. When the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the grass and trees, the dogs would accompany the evening runners. Their paws made soft, rhythmic sounds against the gravel paths, and their eyes gleamed with intelligence and affection. Their loyalty had become so ingrained that many who visited the park could hardly imagine a day without them. But one evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline and painted the horizon in fiery oranges and reds, an unsettling silence greeted the joggers. The usual symphony of panting dogs and wagging tails was conspicuously absent. Confused, the runners paused, exchanging glances, Where were the dogs? The soft, familiar greetings that they had expected throughout their run were nowhere to be heard. The silence felt heavy, almost unnatural, like the park itself was holding its breath. A low guttural growl shattered the quiet, making the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. It was deep, resonant, and filled with a malevolent intelligence. The runners stopped in their tracks, scanning the dimming park for the source. Emerging from the shadows was a black dog, far larger than any they had ever seen in the park. Its eyes glowed faintly in the twilight, and its massive jaws dripped with thick, dark blood. The runners instinctively stepped back, their hearts hammering. Before they could even process the creature's size, a dark figure appeared beside it. The figure was humanoid but cloaked in shadows, its form undefined, shifting as if it were made of smoke. A fetid, sulphurous stench filled the air, choking the runners and making them gag. The figure raised a hand, elongated and clawed, pointing at them as if marking their presence. "When there are no dogs," it said in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself, "do not come to the park. For on this day walks the devil's dog. You have been warned." The words, slow and deliberate, resonated through the park, a chilling warning that froze every runner in place. Before anyone could respond, the black dog and the shadowy figure vanished as quickly as they had appeared, dissolving into the twilight as if swallowed by the darkness itself. The runners, paralyzed with fear, barely managed to scramble away, racing back through the empty paths toward the city lights. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, hearts pounding as adrenaline surged through their veins. Even when they reached the safety of their homes, the echo of the growl and the memory of the glowing eyes haunted them. That night, sleep was elusive, replaced instead by the sense of being watched, hunted, and warned of something beyond comprehension. Rumors spread quickly the following day. People whispered in cafes, in gyms, and on social media, recounting the terrifying encounter. Some doubted the story, attributing it to the fear of darkness and imagination running wild. But those who had been there knew the truth. Something had shifted in the park. The gentle dogs had disappeared that evening, leaving behind a void that was filled with malevolence. The city's bustling citizens, normally unafraid and skeptical of urban legends, began to feel a collective unease. Every evening thereafter, those who had witnessed the black dog avoided the park, and others began to notice the absence of the familiar, friendly dogs. Each day that passed without them, the legend of the devil's dog grew stronger. The park, once a symbol of peace and joy, became a place of whispered caution and fearful curiosity. Children no longer played there after sunset, and even the most avid runners altered their schedules, retreating home before twilight. Days turned into weeks, yet the park remained eerily silent at dusk. The black dog was never seen again, nor was the shadowy figure, but the memory lingered like a persistent shadow. Locals started to leave offerings along the trails, small bones, scraps of meat, and even candles, hoping to appease whatever force had appeared. The park had transformed into a place of vigilance, where every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig could be perceived as a threat. One evening, a young couple decided to test the rumors. They entered the park just as the sun began to dip below the skyline. Their laughter and chatter soon faded as the familiar dogs were nowhere to be found. The moment felt different. The air was heavier, tinged with the same sulphurous stench that witnesses had described before. A sense of dread hung over them, making each step feel heavier, each breath more labored. The black dog, they feared, could appear at any moment, a manifestation of judgment or vengeance for those who ignored the warning. Suddenly, from the deepest shadows of the trees, a growl rolled out, low and menacing. It vibrated through the ground and into their bones. The couple froze, eyes wide as a pair of glowing orbs appeared among the branches. The massive black dog emerged, its fur matted and glistening with something dark. Its eyes glimmered with intelligence, almost awareness, as it stepped closer. Each movement deliberate and terrifying. Behind it, the shadowy figure rose, indistinct yet suffocatingly present. Its voice, a rasp of pure menace, whispered. The warning was given. You ignored it. The couple ran, stumbling through the darkened paths, their hearts pounding in rhythm with the dog's growls. The scent of sulfur was overwhelming, filling their lungs and making it nearly impossible to breathe. They didn't stop until they reached the park entrance, where the familiar city lights offered a fragile sense of safety. From that night onward, they never returned, and they shared their story only with those who dared to listen. Over time, the legend became ingrained in the city's culture. Residents told it to newcomers, warning them never to enter the park after sunset, especially on nights when the dogs were absent. The black dog was never captured, never explained, but the fear it inspired was real. The park remained a symbol of the thin veil between normalcy and the supernatural, a place where the rules of the world no longer seemed to apply. Even now, years later, some say that on certain evenings, if you run alone through the park after the dogs have vanished, you may hear the growl of the black dog and smell the sulfur in the air. And if you are unlucky enough to see it, its glowing eyes will pierce through the darkness, and the shadowy figure will remind you why the park belongs not to the living, but to the devil's dog. In the bustling streets of New York City, a legend has persisted for decades, one whispered among locals, repeated by taxi drivers, and recounted in the dim light of crowded bars and diners. It is the story of the crocodiles of New York, a tale as surreal as it is terrifying, blurring the line between myth and reality. It begins in the early 1930s, a time when the city was vibrant yet chaotic, filled with the clatter of trolley cars, the hum of industry, and the mingling of countless immigrants chasing dreams. Within this backdrop, a wealthy family residing on the Upper East Side made a peculiar acquisition, a small, exotic creature, a baby crocodile, just a few inches long. The family, enamored by the novelty of the pet, initially cherished it. The child of the household was delighted, imagining a tiny, scaly companion swimming in a lavish marble bathtub. But as the weeks passed, the crocodile began to grow. Its small, harmless appearance transformed into something more menacing. Its jaws strengthened, its tail thrashed with frightening speed, and its appetite became increasingly difficult to satisfy. What had once seemed charming now evoked dread and regret. The parents, panic, overtaking affection, faced a dilemma. They could not keep such a creature safely within the apartment, nor did they want to confront the logistics of feeding and caring for a rapidly growing reptile. In a moment of desperation, they made a fateful decision. They flushed the creature down the toilet. According to the legend, this single act was the beginning of a far more significant phenomenon. The crocodile was flushed into the vast sewage system beneath Manhattan, a labyrinth of tunnels, pipes, and hidden waterways stretching for miles. The city's infrastructure, dark and suffocating, became the creature's new home. As the story goes, the baby crocodile did not perish. Instead, it adapted to the subterranean environment, the warmth of the pipes, the abundance of rats and other vermin, and the isolation allowed the creature to grow at an unnatural pace. Over the years, it matured into a formidable predator, and its offspring multiplied in the shadowy depths of New York's sewers. The tale of these sewer-dwelling reptiles spread quickly, fueled by media reports, word of mouth, and the human tendency to blend fact with fiction. Occasionally, locals claimed sightings of unusually large lizards in unexpected places, damp alley, a flooded basement, or even, shockingly, on the street during the night. Some reported that these creatures could grow to astonishing sizes, 10 feet or more, their scaly hides camouflaged in shadows, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Tales emerged of apartment dwellers who had encountered waterlogged reptiles when plunging a toilet or draining a flooded sink, only to flee in terror. Over time, the story evolved into a cautionary tale about the consequences of human carelessness and arrogance. It illustrated how the urban environment, often taken for granted, could harbor hidden dangers. The notion that these creatures lurked beneath the city became an inseparable part of New York folklore, whispered to children as a warning to respect nature and the delicate balance of ecosystems. Tourists and skeptics alike would scoff, dismissing it as mere legend, yet the stories persisted, fueled by occasional glimpses of strange shapes in storm drains or glimpses of movement beneath subway grates, whether entirely true or a product of imagination. The legend of the New York crocodiles endures. It paints the city not just as a place of towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, but as a living, breathing organism with dark, hidden corners. Beneath the concrete and asphalt lies a secret world where the consequences of human whimsy take on terrifying scaled forms. The story begins with one impulsive act, one decision to discard a living creature thoughtlessly, and spirals into a tale of survival, adaptation, and the eerie possibility that beneath the city, these crocodiles still thrive. As the years passed, stories of these elusive creatures multiplied almost as quickly as the crocodiles themselves. Urban legends began to describe entire colonies thriving beneath the city streets, their numbers growing with each generation. The sewers, normally perceived as dark, unpleasant, but harmless, were transformed into a subterranean jungle, filled with winding tunnels, flooded chambers, and secret water passages connecting rivers and drains. The crocodiles, perfectly adapted to their hidden world, became apex predators of this forgotten environment. Their survival instincts sharpened, their senses evolved to detect vibrations from above, their eyes adjusting to the faint, flickering light of the occasional manhole opening. New York locals would tell tales of mysterious encounters that seemed to validate the legends. Sanitation workers occasionally reported enormous lizards slipping from pipes during inspections. Plumbers told stories of crawling, hissing shadows that vanished when lights flickered on. Fishermen in the East River claimed to glimpse massive, scaly backs slicing through the murky water at night. Some even swore that subway rats mysteriously disappeared, suggesting they had become prey to unseen hunters below. Newspapers in the 1930s and 40s occasionally ran sensational stories describing giant sewer lizards with eyes that glowed like coals and jaws capable of snapping a broomstick in half. The legend gained further credibility through photographs, though always blurry or ambiguous, capturing faint outlines of massive creatures in storm drains or subway tunnels. Tourists and thrill seekers began to visit the city specifically to test their courage, peering into manholes and attempting to catch a glimpse of these reptilian denizens. Every Halloween, the story resurfaced, and whispers of the New York crocodiles spread across the country. Local television programs dramatized the accounts, showing actors exploring the sewers with flashlights, encountering the faint glimmer of a tail, the ripple of water, or the reflection of pale eyes in darkened pools. The legend also morphed into a cautionary tale about the consequences of negligence and cruelty. The story emphasized that the crocodile's existence was a direct result of the careless actions of a wealthy family. One impulsive decision to discard a living creature that should have been treated with care. In folklore, this moral was often highlighted. Humans meddle with nature at their own risk, and even the smallest act of negligence could unleash chaos beyond comprehension. Children grew up hearing the story as a warning, imagining colossal predators lurking just below the city sidewalks, waiting for those who dared to disrespect life. Some accounts even suggested that these crocodiles had begun venturing beyond the sewers, exploring the streets and abandoned buildings at night. Shadows moving beneath fire escapes, mysterious splashes in puddles after heavy rain, and footprints in alleyways fueled a growing sense of unease. Residents swore they had encountered eyes reflecting their flashlight beams in darkened corners, only for the shapes to vanish moments later. The creatures, according to legend, had become nearly invisible masters of stealth, perfectly attuned to their urban environment. Though skeptics dismissed these stories as exaggerations or hoaxes, the legend persisted. Over the decades, the myth of New York's crocodiles merged with the city's symbol of the hidden, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening nature of urban life. To some, the creatures represented the power of nature to reclaim its territory. To others, they were a reminder that even a single reckless act could have consequences beyond imagination. Even today, the legend continues to inspire fear and fascination. Whether one chooses to believe in the crocodile's existence or not, the stories serve as an enduring reminder. Beneath the bustling streets of Manhattan, in the hidden depths of the sewers, there may still be creatures lurking in the shadows, waiting for the curious, the careless, or the unlucky to stumble into their realm. The urban myth of the New York crocodiles is more than just a tale of monsters. It is a story of survival, adaptation, and the uncanny ways in which nature can persist in the most unexpected places. The city above may seem orderly and bright, but below, a hidden world thrives, reminding all who hear the tale that New York is not only a place of opportunity and dreams, but also a labyrinth of secrets and silent predators. Years passed, and the city never seemed to forget the rumors of the crocodiles. Children whispered the tales in school, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Subway workers told stories of glimpses in the tunnels, of scales glinting under dim lights, of long, sinuous tails vanishing into the darkness. Even at the most mundane moments, a splash in a puddle or a ripple in the sewers could send chills down a New Yorker's spine. Tourists laughed when they first heard the story, imagining oversized reptiles slithering through the underground pipes. But those who had lived in the city longer knew better. There were accounts, never officially verified, of shadows moving where shadows shouldn't, of noises that didn't match any animal known to the city. Late-night joggers sometimes claimed to see green eyes, reflecting the streetlights from storm drains, disappearing before anyone else could look. The legend became a part of the city's folklore, whispered in bars, told in the corners of libraries, and on online forums where people shared true sightings. What made the tale truly terrifying was its unpredictability. The crocodiles were not confined to the sewers. Occasionally, residents reported unusual patterns: drains clogged with mud and strange debris, gardens ravaged, pools mysteriously drained, and even basements flooded with murky water. Pets disappeared without explanation, leaving owners frantic. Each incident reinforced the notion that these creatures had grown bold and cunning, perhaps evolved over decades in the city's hidden waterways. Authorities predictably dismissed the stories as urban myth. Reports were logged and ignored, dismissed as exaggerations or misidentified animals. But some city workers who had spent years in the sewers whispered privately that the sightings were real. They spoke of the strange noises echoing off brick walls, of tracks that couldn't belong to any known mammal, and of a quiet intelligence behind the eyes that caught theirs in the darkness. They warned that the reptiles were not mindless. They were calculating, patient, and possibly waiting for the right moment to surface. The legend reached its peak one hot summer night, when a series of disappearances shook a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. Pets vanished, basement doors were left ajar, and murky footprints appeared along the alleyways. At first, neighbors assumed a burglar, a vagrant, or some natural disaster. But when a local teenager reported a video on his phone, motionless shapes slipping through the sewage grates, long tails flicking beneath the streetlights, the city's urban legend took a horrifying turn into reality. News outlets labeled it a hoax, yet the video spread like wildfire. Millions watched, paused, and replayed the footage, debating its authenticity, feeling a growing dread with every passing second. People began changing their routines. They avoided poorly lit streets, they steered clear of open drains and grates, and they checked their homes for signs of intrusion. The once invisible sewers became a place of terror, a reminder that New York held secrets beneath its bustling streets. Children were warned to never play near alleys and storm drains, and even adults felt a subtle tension as they walked past the city's oldest neighborhoods. And the crocodiles, if they were still there, remained unseen but always suspected, a lurking threat beneath the surface. Some say they multiply, adapting to the labyrinth of tunnels, growing larger and more cunning, feeding on the city's waste, and perhaps on anything foolish enough to wander too close. Others whisper that, on certain nights, when the city's noise fades and the shadows lengthen, you can hear them moving beneath you, the faint splash of water, the shift of a massive body, the subtle vibration of the streets above. So the next time you flush the toilet, walk past a storm drain, or glance at a dark alley, remember the tale of the New York crocodiles. The city may seem safe, the streets familiar, and the subway routine mundane, but somewhere below, In the unseen depths, creatures wait. The legend may be old, the story whispered countless times, yet the terror remains, a reminder that in a city built on concrete and steel, nature's most primal forces might still thrive, hidden, patient, and watching. After all, urban legends often start with a seed of truth, and some truths, especially the terrifying ones, never die.